Breaking news here on CBS Sports HQ. The college football playoff is now set. Jeremy St. Louis alongside Brady Quinn for reaction to this. We've got reaction coming up for the next little while here. We're going to talk to a number of different folks about what we've seen. We know the top 4 teams in the nation now. We get Michigan, Washington, Texas, and Alabama, which means that Florida State is out, and the #1 team in the nation prior to this week also out, the Georgia Bulldogs, the 2-time defending champions. So Brady, first of all, I'll get your reaction to this. Were you surprised at the way that the 4 teams laid out?
I wasn't surprised. I thought the College Football Playoff Committee had a couple of moves, and as they released the picks, once they put Texas at #3, I think it shined a little bit of a light on the fact that Florida State was going to end up being outside of the top 4. Reason being is, look, if it's an undefeated Power 5 conference champ, you would have thought they would have been ahead of a one-loss conference champ. But at that moment, you knew right then and there, they weren't necessarily trusting just based on whatever criteria the College Football Playoff Committee has written down or comes up with. They were looking at who they feel most confident in at this point in the season right now. And these are the 4 teams you'd have to look at based on conference championships, their strength of schedule, head-to-head play based on the order. And it's unfortunate for Florida State. There's no other way to put it. And my heart breaks for those young men that are in that locker room, their coach and their staff, Mike Norvell. You go undefeated, you do everything you're asked to do, and you don't get in the college playoff. It's awful. But the reality is, we've seen this precedent before. We saw Ohio State in 2014. They were in a similar situation. They blew out Wisconsin. They left no doubt in the College Football Playoff Committee's mind. I think because of their performance in a tight win versus Louisville, it left a lot of people in that College Football Playoff Committee doubting what this Florida State team is going to be without Jordan Travis. As terrible as that is to admit, that's the reality of the situation.
Yeah, that Ohio State team in 2014, Cardale Jones, 3 took them to big victories there, and they end up winning the national championship.
Yeah.
But Brady, I just want to ask you, in your opinion, are these the best 4 teams in the nation?
No. Because if you're talking about the best 4 teams based on how people would handicap them, Georgia would be a part of the conversation. I'm sorry, people aren't going to like that response. Georgia, Bama, Michigan, Texas, those are probably the best 4 teams. Ask any handicapper out there in Vegas, those 4 teams would probably be or highest rated, power rated, however you want to determine that, over Washington, over Florida State with their current situation. If Jordan Travis is there, maybe a little different story. Not the case, though. So, to be quite honest, if that's the game we're playing, those are the 4 teams I would have thrown in there.
And it's a team game, but it is one player that basically essentially sets it out for Florida as they finish at 5 in the rankings. All right, let's make our way through the playoff teams. It starts with 13-0 Michigan, who are elevated to the #1 seed, with Georgia losing Saturday to Alabama. The Wolverines won their 3rd straight Big Ten championship last night, shutting out Iowa. They are seeking their first national title since 1997 and a first title for the Big Ten since 2014. At the 2 spot, we get the Pac-12 champions, Washington. They enter the playoffs on a 20-game winning streak. They are the first Pac-12 team to reach the playoff since they themselves did it back in 2016. Their 13 wins is the most in a single season for the program. The 3rd-ranked team, the Texas Longhorns, who claimed their first Big 12 title since 2009 by beating a ranked Oklahoma State on Saturday. And they put on a show doing it, setting a new record for total yards and total yards passing in a Big 12 title game. They've also scored 49 or more points in back-to-back games. They went 4-1 against AP and college football playoff ranked teams this season, including a double-digit win in Tuscaloosa over Alabama. It is their first time in the college football playoff. And speaking of Alabama, they are the final team to make the playoff 4. They beat the #1 team in the nation Saturday to win the SEC championship. The win was a 9th SEC title under Nick Saban and a 4th straight win over Georgia in the conference title game. They also ended the Bulldogs' 29-game winning streak dating back to their last SEC championship meeting in 2021. This will be their 8th appearance in the playoff in the past 10 years. And that means that for the first time, a Power 5 team who went undefeated misses out on the college football playoff. We knew we would have a controversial situation no matter who was put in and who was left out. It is devastating for Florida State and their fans, but College Football Playoff Executive Director Bill Hancock repeatedly said it's about the 4 best teams, not necessarily the most deserving. Georgia and Ohio State, by the way, left out. They were the only teams to be ranked #1 in the playoff rankings this season, and they both miss out on the playoff. So, Florida State has issued a statement, a long statement from Michael Alford, but here's the part that we took out. To eliminate them from a chance to compete for a national championship, is an unwarranted injustice that shows complete disregard and disrespect for their performance and accomplishments. It is unforgivable. All right, let's welcome Jerry Palm in here for his reaction. Jerry, first of all, I want to get some process information from you. What's the process for this committee leading up to these final rankings?
Well, their process doesn't change from week to week. It's the same. They start voting, nominating teams and voting from the top and working their way down. But what changes this week is that conference championships exist, which is one of the criteria that does not exist before this week. So Texas won a championship. Alabama won a championship. Florida State won a championship. You know, Michigan, Washington, all of these teams won their championships this weekend. So now that's part of the criteria that comes into play that had not been in play prior to this week. And that's really the biggest difference in the process.
Jerry, did the committee get it right?
Well, you're going to upset somebody no matter what. And I don't blame Florida State for being really angry because they won all their games. The committee leaving out an undefeated major conference team is unprecedented. You know, they've been punished for winning games with their backup quarterbacks. And that Louisville game, they had their third string quarterback in there and still found a way to win. So I think that, you know, for me, if I'm on the committee, I'm voting for Florida State and not Alabama. But, you know, there's a case for Alabama. You know, that's a really good team. You know, they won the SEC. They had a great season. They had to be behind Texas, and they were behind Texas. I would have a bigger problem if Alabama was ahead of Texas than leaving out Florida State that's shorthanded. But it's really unfortunate, you know, for Florida State to be in this situation.
Jerry, one of the things we were discussing was the fact that Florida State essentially being punished for the injury to Jordan Travis. When we look at Alabama, when they lost that game to Texas, I mean, they had a very unsettled quarterback situation as well, much like what Florida State is going through right now in the latter weeks of the season. So why was Florida State punished for their quarterback situation, but that was not held against Bama when they lost to Texas?
Because Alabama's quarterback situation was about performance. They didn't have a clear starter. They were still trying to figure it out. Florida State lost their starting quarterback, and he's not coming back. So this is, you know, an absence that's prolonged and would, you know, carry into the playoffs. So, you know, teams are figuring out their quarterbacks, whatever. You know, that's just part of football. But you lose a player, it changes Florida State dramatically, and the committee felt enough that they should not be in the playoff ahead of either Texas or Alabama.
And since we're talking about teams being penalized, I mean, obviously the Michigan situation is something that we've been talking about for a number of weeks. So why was Michigan not punished for what's happened with them this season?
Because it's not the selection committee's job to adjudicate NCAA rules infractions. You know, the NCAA had said Michigan was ineligible, or we're going to suspend, you know, a bunch of players or whatever, which this is not the kind of thing where players would get suspended. But if you have a material change in Michigan's roster because of this, then that's something they have to take into account. But it's not their job to punish Michigan for a cheating scandal that the NCAA hasn't fully addressed yet.
Our Jerry Palm reacting to the college football playoff, which is now set. Great stuff, Jerry. Thank you very much for popping on with us. Prior to Sunday, we've had a number of things that we were expecting to happen, and here's what the committee had never done. All right, left the SEC out of the CFP, left an undefeated Power 5 team out of the playoff. They've never dropped the #1 team entering the final week outside the top 4. So that happens with Georgia going to 6. And they've never selected a team for the college football playoff that entered the final week 7th or lower. Alabama getting into the playoff. All right, so let's get more reaction to this. We bring in Barrett Sallee and Bryant McFadden for this. And gentlemen, first, Barrett, I'll start with you. Just getting your reaction to the college football playoff now being set.
Yeah, stunned, sad, disappointed in the process. I think in this case, there shouldn't have been a doubt. Florida State won all their games. They won some of them handily. And they survived incredible turmoil and in an incredible situation at the exact wrong time and still got the job done. A job, by the way, with one of the best defensive performances of the season by any team yesterday in the ACC championship game. So to see the resilience of that team, and you saw Michael Alford in that statement by Florida State basically say the same thing. To see the resilience that this team had, the ability to pick up the slack. Every team goes through injuries. Now, granted, not all of them have an injury to the Heisman Trophy caliber quarterback, but Brian will tell you, every team has issues. And for them to navigate through all of them and go undefeated, beat a pretty good Louisville team in an emphatic defensive performance, an incredible defensive performance, basically says that the first 10 games don't count. And that Alabama's early season struggles, which included a very sloppy win over a bad South Florida team, and its late season struggle against a 6-6 Auburn team, well, that doesn't count either. Which, okay, if Alabama's not a conference champion, or I should say if Florida State's not a conference champion, okay, maybe you make that argument. But it's not like Alabama's been dominant lately. As a matter of fact, they played really sloppy 8 days ago. And that doesn't count? I don't get it. I feel really bad for Florida State. I feel really bad for Jordan Travis, Tate Rodemaker, all those guys there. They're getting screwed in this situation, and I'm just stunned that the committee would do this to an undefeated Power 5 conference champion.
B-Mac, I can't imagine how you're feeling, a former Florida State player. You saw the selection committee rules there that we just walked through, and the things that had never happened before that have happened today. So give us your reaction to this, obviously very devastating for Florida State.
Yeah, I'm extremely hurt for the players there. You know what I mean? Being a student athlete at one point in time, I know how hard it is to, number one, go through your regular season schedule and be flawless. I know how hard it is. I know how hard it is to have an opportunity to compete for a championship. And when you do everything that you're supposed to do, and the last time I checked, guys, when you're competing, the name of the game is to win by any means necessary. And they won every ball game, facing so many adverse situations, dealing with turmoil, things that they cannot control, but they found ways to win. For them to be penalized because to the committee, it wasn't pretty enough. The best thing about winning is that's the ultimate goal. I can care less how it looks, as long as you're winning ball games. And last time I checked, the last 2 ball games they played without Jordan Travis, they both covered the spread. They covered the spread in both opportunities. So the goalpost is moving for some teams. It moved for Alabama because, Barrett, you were right on. When you look at Alabama, oh, they talk about where they ain't playing their best football. As you mentioned 8 days ago, they needed a miracle. They needed a miracle from God for them to be able to have a legit chance to keep their playoff hopes alive. Think about that. And then when you look at some of the other sloppy games we saw from Alabama that probably wasn't pretty enough, but they won ball games. They won by 3 against Arkansas. They beat A&M by 6. And as we mentioned, they needed a 3-point win against Auburn. Those 3 teams that they struggled against, but yet and still they won, they have a combined record of 17-19. 17-19. So you're telling college players that it doesn't mean anything if you win all of your ball games. You can't afford to have any injuries, because if you have an injury to a significant player, specifically speaking your quarterback, you probably might not get into the playoffs. So this is a hard pill to swallow for college football fans. Definitely a hard pill to swallow for Florida State, because they did everything you were supposed to do. And they won their conference, a major conference, to be on the outside looking in for 2 teams that took one on the chin and fell on the canvas and didn't get up.
One of the things that obviously stands out that would have made it easier for the committee is if Florida State had gone 1-1 since Jordan Travis went down, but they didn't. They went 2-0, so that makes it obviously a more difficult decision. B-Mac, I want to ask you, yesterday the SEC Commissioner, Greg Sankey, went on television and said, look, let's play Sesame Street here. One of these things is not like the other, basically saying that the SEC is just at a different level than everybody else. What message does what happened today send to confirm that?
Yeah, they moved the goalposts for SEC teams. Specifically speaking, Alabama. And heck, Georgia probably would have had a better chance of getting in also, even with the one loss, losing yesterday. The SEC, let's keep it real. The SEC for such a long time has been a dominant conference. But this year, no. Florida State played 2 SEC opponents. They covered the spread in both. They beat one by 21 points, if I'm not mistaken. At that time, LSU was top 5 in the country, right? We beat Florida with our second-string quarterback on the road in the swamp, a rival, right? Alabama needed a miracle to beat their bad rival. We didn't need a miracle to beat our rival. We just played physical football and beat our rival and covered the spread. So for Sankey to sit here and say the SEC just, no, not this year. Not this year. When you look at the SEC East, it's Georgia, Mizzou, and who? It's a traffic jam of below-average teams based on what we thought they would do in this upcoming season. The SEC West, let's keep it real, right? It's not like it's been as competitive as we've seen in years past. So you gotta miss me with that narrative. For such a long time, that has been the narrative with the SEC, and deserving so. But this year, the SEC wasn't as tough like that. It wasn't, and the ACC was 6-4 against the SEC. Yeah. So the ACC, the little sisters of the poor, they like to call them, they were above 500 when facing off against SEC opponents. So miss me with that. It is what it is. I'm okay because I've lived this life of playing in college football. I've lived the life of playing professional football and competing for a championship. But I would not be okay if that opportunity was robbed from me. Doing everything that I was supposed to do, and you're telling me, well, you had an unfortunate injury to a quarterback, and you guys didn't win in the fashion that we wanted to see you win, so you're not going. You know how hard it is to compete for a championship? You have guys that competed their entire life in some sport and never get an opportunity to compete for a championship because they weren't good enough or their team wasn't good enough. It's one thing to have to go through that, but it's another for your team to be good enough to do everything that you're supposed to do based on the records and the stats and still get robbed of that opportunity. So it's a sad day in college football, I think. And Barrett, I really appreciate your analysis because you don't have a dog in the race, but you're seeing things from a set of lens that's clearly they're clean, squeaky clean, and you see what's right and what's wrong. And there are a lot of fans and people that are seeing the same thing, and a lot of people, hey, they're a quarterback. Okay, I guess if you have an injury moving forward to a quarterback, just don't play the games anymore because it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and look, I get called an SEC homer a lot because I grew up in SEC country. I live in SEC country. But B-Mac's completely right. This was not a good year in the SEC, and I understand Greg Sankey lobbying for him. I mean, look, I get it. That's his job. But he's wrong. And look, the ACC did have a better record against the SEC this year. Now, some of that's matchups or whatever, and you don't take a whole lot from that, but it is indicative a little bit of where the SEC is. But I'm very fascinated to see when the rest of the rankings come out, where those SEC teams like Missouri, Ole Miss, Tennessee, LSU, where they're ranked, because a lot of the decision making with Florida State and Alabama is directly tied to where those teams rank in the final rankings. And Tennessee, for whatever reason, the committee loves. I don't know why. Tennessee's not a very good football team, but they were in the top 25 last week. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see if any SEC teams got a bump for no apparent reason, because if they did, then to me it would look like the committee is engineering Alabama over Florida State, and they say they never do that. But in this case, I think there could be an argument to that if some of these SEC teams get inflated. So B-Mac's right. It's sad for Florida State. They should be in. And Greg Sankey has to lobby for his conference. But this is not the SEC that is a power. It is Georgia, Alabama, and everybody else. And you look at those everybody else's, and Missouri's good, obviously. Ole Miss is good, obviously. Are they head and shoulders above some of these second-tier ACC teams? No, they're not head and shoulders above them. They might be better than them. But this is not the SEC that just can steamroll everybody. It doesn't have a beefy middle that is superior to a lot of other conferences. It just doesn't. It's just not, and that's reality this year.
Barrett Sallee, Brian McFadden reacting to the fact that Florida State has been kept out of the college football playoff, and the top 4 teams that are in, they are not part of it, and neither is the former #1, the 2-time defending champion, Georgia. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your always eloquent insight. BMAC, appreciate your passion. Earlier today, Brady Quinn was talking about the devastation that Jordan Travis must feel. Well, he's on social media, and here's what he's put out. Devastated, heartbroken, in so much disbelief right now. I wish my leg broke earlier in the season so y'all could see this team as much more than the quarterback. I thought results matter. 13-0 in this roster matches up across any team in those top 4 rankings. I am so sorry. Go Noles. All right, here's a look at the teams that have made the largest jump into the college football playoff field in the final week. Prior to today, no team had ever been ranked 7 or lower the week before and then made the playoff. Today, 2 teams did in Alabama and Texas. All right, the matchups are set. The road to the Natty clearly laid out for the nation's top 4 teams. On the other side, we'll dig into the playoff semifinals with Brady and Chip Patterson. Who has the edge and who could surprise? Next.